I think we are good to go. Hello to everyone who's joining us today and to everyone who's listening to the recording as well. Welcome to another Totara product webinar. So today we've got Steve who's going to be talking to us about accessibility and some of the work that we've been doing here at Totara to improve the accessibility of our products. So Steve's going to be going through some of the improvements we've made to our processes when we're building and designing, as well as what we're aiming to achieve for the version 13 release. My name is Sonia and I will be facilitating the questions that come up through the chat throughout the session. And I'll be raising these questions for Steve to answer as they come up as well. So I'll just start with some housekeeping and then Steve, you can get started.
Cool.
So this webinar is a recorded session. This is to ensure that all partners are able to access the same information. And so we're going to be posting a link to this recording within the partner area of the community once the webinar is over. So with this recording, we'll open up a partner discussion forum specifically about this webinar. So if you don't already, please subscribe to the product updates forum, as this is the easiest way for all the product managers to speak directly to partners on an ad hoc basis and for us to engage with you. So yeah, Steve, you can get started.
Great, thank you very much, Sonia, and thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Steve. I've joined Totara in January this year, and my job title is Senior Front-End Developer. That's because I'm experienced and I'm old. And although my job title is developer, I do a bit of a mix of lots of front-end coding, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but also a little bit of design in terms of the UX kind of space, and quite a lot of testing and a QA kind of role, all centered around accessibility. And as Sonia said, what I'm going to talk to you about today is what we at Totara have been doing to try and make Totara 13 learn, engage, and perform the most accessible things that we've put out yet. If there's one thing that I'd like you to remember from this session, it's to look up and install DQ's Axe browser extension. The reason that I like it is because it's very quick and easy to use. It runs in the developer tools of your browser. You hit a button and it scans a page for you. And I really appreciate their philosophy, which is that they try to not have any false positives. So you won't see a list of 150 things that you should definitely fix right now. They try and keep the list nice and short. So things on this list, they're probably worth looking at. And even on that list, they kind of classify them for you. Is it a moderate issue or a kind of a critical issue? So I find it very helpful, and it's a great way to get a quick kind of temperature reading of a page. Like, is it something we need to worry about, or is it something that's kind of okay and we can come back to later? So this is what I'm going to cover today. Three big sections of the accessibility improvements that we've been working on. First of all, I'll talk a bit about the things that we've done in the design phase of various bits and pieces. Then I'll talk a bit about the development, some changes that we've made in the code and way we review code. And then last of all, I'll talk about some testing, a little bit of kind of developer testing, but a little bit of kind of QA style testing as well. Since we're talking about accessibility, maybe it's nice to frame it a little bit and have a bit of a reminder of what we mean when we say this. So the thing that we're using as our standard, which is a fairly kind of global standard these days, is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These at the moment are at version 2.1. They've got these four principles that you can see here: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, or POUR if you fancy a little acronym. And these four principles break down further into individual success criteria. These success criteria are great. They're little sentences that are kind of testable criteria for your website. For instance, the very first one is text alternatives. Do I have text alternatives to all the non-text things on my website? This is a little phrase that a thing you can test, like, is this true or is this false? These success criteria come at various levels: level A, level AA, and level AAA. Level A being a baseline level of accessibility, like these are things that you absolutely must do. Level A being a good level of accessibility, and level AAA being an amazing, incredible, oh wow, how did you even do this kind of level of accessibility. the W3C, the people that push out these guidelines, even say that level AAA is a bit much for most websites, and for some websites is in fact impossible to achieve. So that's why this level AA is what all of the standards follow. The US revised Section 508 standards for accessibility are set at level AA, version 2.0 of the guidelines actually, and the EU 301549, which is a very lovely, memorable number, those standards basically are equal to the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, at 2.1 level AA. So that's what we're using as our yardstick, the WCAG 2.1 level AA. Something that all of this is feeding into for us is this generation of an accessibility conformance report. So we're working on this right now. It's kind of in progress. It's kind of mostly done, but like all of these things, it's always a work in progress. And what we're aiming for is to have a finished ACR as soon as we finish development. As we're finishing off bits and pieces, we're finishing up bits and pieces of this ACR. And our goal is to have a kind of clear audit trail from this ACR to the process that we have and to the various bits of the Totara learn, perform, and engage. What we're using is this VPAT, which is very kind of widely used, which stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, if I remember correctly. And there's a couple of versions of it. And the one that we're using at the moment is an international edition. So what that means is it has the WCAG in it, the 2.0, the 2.1, the A and the AA, but in the details of it, it points out how it matches up with the US revised Section 508 and how it matches up with the EU standards. So this one ACR covers three things for us: the US market, the EU market, and anyone that uses WCAG as its kind of guideline, which is where people seem to be moving in that kind of general direction. The way that it's looking for us at the moment is that we're going to have the overall status of the ACR is going to be partially supports compliance for WCAG 2.1 at level AA. So what does that mean? It means that we've got lots of things on that list of success criteria saying supports, but we will have some things that say partially supports, meaning either there's a few bits and pieces that don't quite meet the standard, or there are some exceptions in some cases. An important part for us is that these bits that are marked as partially supported, we are listing as high priority bugs. And once the code goes out in a couple of weeks' time and everyone gets their hands on it, any bugs that come in, accessibility bugs, we're treating, or accessibility issues, we'll be treating as bugs. And that's an important thing for us. And we're going to be placing a high priority on fixing those accessibility bugs to keep this level AA WCAG 2.1 standard. So let's have a look at some of the things we've been doing in the design phase. A thing that we've introduced very recently in a slightly more formal manner is having an accessibility review step for every design ticket. If any of you out there use Jira, you might recognize that little picture, and it might make some of you cry. It does make me cry sometimes. But having this official extra step for every ticket is really great. As you may be familiar with, fixing things is always better done earlier in the process. It's a bit quicker to do, it's a bit easier to do, and it's certainly cheaper. So we are trying to check for accessibility of our stuff as early as possible, right at the point when we're making the design. One of the things that we do in this review excuse me, is to make sure that we're preferring simpler solutions where possible and standard solutions where possible, because they tend to be the best supported across various browsers and technologies and across various assistive technology. So this is a big thing for us. Another thing we do in the design phase is have a couple of rules of thumb to see, do we think that we're doing a good job on this screen and on this process? So two of the good rules of thumbs that we use are that every form control needs to have a name, whether it's visible on the screen or not. And every group of controls need to have a name, whether it's visible on the screen or not. And perhaps you're thinking, like, well, why would a form control not have a name? Well, a popular one is a search box. and on the top right maybe of a screen, often you'll see just the search input and then a button. Perhaps the button says search, perhaps it's a little picture of a magnifying glass or something, but visually showing the name of that control, the search name, seems a little bit redundant. So we decide to often not show it visually, but we do need to still have an accessible name for it somewhere in the HTML. Another one for a group of controls is something you might see on these two little pictures. If I ask you, please pick red, green, or blue, that's not particularly helpful. But if I ask you, please pick your favorite color, red, green, or blue, the name of that group of controls suddenly makes it clear what's going on here. With lots of these things, even if you do a very accessible design, of course, it still needs a developer to implement it accessibly. But these extra bits on the designs and annotations that we make on the designs for this is the name for this, this is the name for that, all of these things help nudge our whole process into a slightly more accessible direction. And perhaps you're looking at these two things and thinking, oh, but Steve, that's just good UX. And in that case, I would definitely agree. And I find that good accessibility and good user experience have a lot in common. Okay, let's move on to some of the things that we've been doing for development. So Totara 13, the new stuff, the Perform and Engage, uses Vue.js, which I'm sure some of you have heard about or heard that this is what we're using. And for doing our unit testing for that, we're using the Jest as our test runner. So that was already set up, and from the beginning we've been using Vue.js and we've been using Jest to test it. There's a little NPM package called JestAx, which adds a layer of accessibility tests. So since we were already using Jest, it was relatively straightforward for us to add JestAx on top of that. And what it essentially does is kind of test, sort of like snapshot testing. It kind of looks at the rendered DOM and does some kind of quick checks there. And if the eagle-eyed and eared among you may have seen that this is called Axe as well, and it runs the same rule set as the Axe browser extension I mentioned at the very top. The JestAx tests here in these unit tests is quite good at checking for explicit errors, like things that are definitely missing that should be there, or things that are there but implemented incorrectly. But it isn't quite so good for testing usage, like what actually happens once it hits the browser. So like Moodle, we're still using VPAT for our kind of integration kind of level testing, and that's something that we're looking at trying to get into, using the VPAT side of things to do a bit of accessibility testing as well. But for now, we've got JestAx testing built into the code with each core component to make sure that we've got some checks at least going on there. Another thing that we've been doing in terms of development is, much like the design phase, we've got a accessibility review phase now. And here's a picture of me reviewing one with emoji. I use lots of emoji in my pull request reviews. And one of the things that happens in this accessibility review is to use some of the tools that I'm about to show you in the next few slides to test the HTML to see if it's come out okay, if the things are tied together nicely, and to do those similar kind of design checks. Are we using the simplest controls that we could here? Are we using standard HTML5 stuff? Are we giving names to every form control, and are we giving names to every group of form controls? One of the biggest things that we've changed is to do a lot more browser-based testing of accessibility. So here's Axe again. You might be able to tell by now that I like it quite a lot. One of the other things that it's good for is it lets you interact with the DOM. So it runs, you click a button, it runs a bunch of tests for you, and it gives you a list of the things that it thinks might be dodgy. And then it lets you click through these and click another button to highlight where on the page this problem is occurring. And I mean, you can kind of see a little bit from its reported test, but just having it show up on the page and be able to look at it a bit more, goes directly into inspecting the HTML from this list, is very handy. It also links, often it also links out to a bit more information, like why is this a problem? And often it'll offer solutions. So that's extremely handy to have right there in the code. You know, like, oh, this image is missing alt text. It will tell you. It will say you can supply some alt text, or you can do this, or you can do that. I think it's really great. When we run this on our code and we find issues that Axe brings up, we log those problems as bugs. So that's how we're treating it. We're saying, cool, if it's not accessible, that's a bug. It's not an improvement that we want to add on top. It's a core feature of our platform. We're going to log this as a thing that is broken, and we're going to fix it. Another tool that I like to use is called Arc Toolkit by the Pacello Group, who are big in the accessibility world. This is for Chrome only, whereas the Axe is for Chrome or Firefox. This one is very verbose, especially when you compare it to Axe. However, the reason I like it is that I find it's a good proxy for screen reader testing. So you might be able to see from the screenshot that it kind of groups things. You know, it groups all the links together, it groups all the buttons together, it groups all the images together. So it lets you read down a list, for example, of all of your links on a page, or all of your headings on a page, or all of your form elements on a page. And you can scan down the list and say, oh, yep, that's good. All the alt text for all of these images, those all seem okay. None of them say picture of, none of the links say click here or read more, and that kind of thing. So one of the ways that screen reader users bounce around websites is navigating like this by groups of things, especially headings. So if, like me, you're at first intimidated by getting to using a screen reader, this is a good way of having a bit of a proxy of that experience in terms of grouping content on the page and using that as a way of seeing the page as a whole and of getting around the page. The Arc Toolkit as well does run its own little set of tests. There's some overlap with Axe, but as I said, it's a bit more verbose, so it goes a bit wider. And anything that crops up in here that is a kind of like a critical level error, something that is explicitly broken, again, we log it as a bug, and then it goes through our normal kind of workflow process. Another thing that we do in terms of the testing side of things is we use a Microsoft thing, another Chrome extension called Accessibility Insights. This is quite a big extension. It's got a whole bunch of stuff, some quick checks and some slow checks. And the thing that we use it for is this slow check thing, what they call an assessment. So it guides you through a whole web page. It's something like 25 or 30 individual kind of categories of things, and it walks you through how to do this. It says, you know, it's like, cool, keyboard. Now we're going to check keyboard things, and it gives you a little step-by-step way of testing the success criteria, essentially. It's quite a big thing, and it's quite deep. And I found when I started using it, at first it was a bit slow going, but the more I used it, the more I sped up. Not just because I got used to the tool, but also because as you're testing over several pages, you know that it's modular, it's componentized, so you don't have to test the nav on every page because it's the same. You don't have to test the sidebar on every page because it's the same, or it's that you know the HTML is the same. So you're testing just little bits of each page all the time. So that's those two things, becoming more familiar with the tool and the fact that pages are all made up of these templates means you get kind of faster and faster, but you're still doing this really broad, really deep check of the accessibility. And this discovers things for you that you won't find through doing the testing with Axe or through doing the testing with the Arc Toolkit extensions. This is a proper kind of manual test. An alternative to using this would be just to go through the WCAG success criteria kind of one by one. And that's also doable, but can be a bit heavier going and a bit slower and a bit more fiddly. Whereas this Microsoft's Accessibility Insights covers lots and lots of the success criteria, like enough to bubble up all of the really big problems. And again, when we discover issues in here and we see that they're kind of critical, broken things, they get logged as bugs, they go on a backlog, and they get processed exactly the same as other bugs do. The final thing that we do for testing for accessibility is some functional testing with screen readers. The two that we use the most are NVDA on Windows and VoiceOver on Mac. I'm on Ubuntu, so I also test on Orca occasionally, but I often find myself mostly testing on NVDA on Windows because that is one of the more popular ones, and it's it's a more pleasing experience than trying to test on Orca on Ubuntu, which doesn't have a text output; it just has voice output. So that makes it difficult to do sometimes if there's lots of people in the office. Um, and we have, for testing with screen readers, we have a bit of a test script that we use. And it's kind of broken down into things to test in the structure of the page, things to test on the interactions of the page, and things to test for the error handling on the page. And much like testing with the Accessibility Insights extension, it's slow going at first. It's a new bit of technology. It's like switching operating systems or something. It's a new bit of tech. It's got its own quirks, but again, after the first couple of times, you start to get used to it, and you quite quickly realize that it's not nearly as hard as you thought it was, especially in terms of giving a good enough level of test to see that everything is working as you expect and that nothing is obviously broken. So that was it. That was the three things that I wanted to cover, the three areas of stuff that we're changing and improving on hopefully a daily basis to try and get a bit better and to make Totara more accessible. Under the design section of things, we've got this accessibility review step. We are using rules of thumbs, like making sure things and groups of things have names, and we're trying to prefer simpler and more standard solutions. Under the development phase, we're adding just acts to all of our jest tests for our Vue.js core components, and we're doing accessibility reviews on any pull requests for the code that goes into the main code base. From the testing side, which is a bit of doing it while we're developing and a bit of doing it after we're kind of a bit more finished, we're using Axe browser extension, we're using the Arc Toolkit browser extension for quick runs on a completed page. We're using Microsoft's Accessibility Insights Chrome extension to do assessments of whole pages, like a guided walkthrough, and we're doing functional testing with screen readers. So that seems like quite a lot of things, but if you do remember just one thing, I would really like it to be DQ's Axe browser extension. I'm not on commission with them. I just really, really like this product. This free product that you can install in either Chrome or Firefox. It's quick and easy to use. It tries to minimize the reports that it gives you by not trying to give you false positives, and it often gives you tips on how to fix the things that are broken. So that's all for me. Thank you very much for listening.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Steve. And thank you for everyone who was listening in today. We didn't have any questions come through the chat, but as always, we're super open to any feedback on anything we've covered today, or if there are any other key aspects of accessibility that you think that we should be considering, please feel free to add a comment in the forum post where this recording will be posted as well. Cool. Thank you, Steve, and thanks everyone else.
Cool.